Everyone, and welcome back to another video, another one of our CC Youth Bible studies. Thank you for joining us today. We're looking at Psalm 15. So Psalm 15 is a Davidic psalm. It is a psalm written with the first Hebrew line in it being Le David, meaning it's of David, for David, by David, something related to David. And this one especially relates to David because it is about the temple. Or at least kind of about the temple. We'll get into that in a little bit. But David and Mount Zion and the first temple are all very much connected. So keep that in mind as you're reading this psalm. Now, it is a temple liturgy, so we're going to go through what those things mean. Liturgy meaning it's used in some kind of a worship setting. So in the church today, we still have liturgy. Depending on what denomination you're in, the liturgy might look different, but most denominations have something like a words of institution, something you say before communion. The night in which he was betrayed, our Lord Jesus took bread, broke it, gave thanks, gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body given for you, do this in remembrance of me," and so on. Something like that. And then there's the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." Then you might say the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. Those are written liturgies, which is probably most similar to this psalm. But then there's just liturgies and how other things happen. When you stand during a service, when you sit during service, other things like that. So there's a lot of things going on with liturgy. But basically what it means is it is a tool that is used to help people worship. So this psalm was used to help people in a corporate setting worship. But it was related to the temple, and that it is an entrance liturgy. Now, there's a subgenre in the Bible of entrance liturgy, and when I say subgenre, it's really small. I know there's 3 passages. There might be a few more, but there's 3. There's one in Isaiah, there's one in Micah 6, and then there's Psalm 15. And basically what it does is it gives a list of requirements to enter into the temple. How do I enter into the temple? What do I have to do to enter in? And there's kind of 3 parts to these different entrance liturgies and to this psalm. There's the question, which is in a gist, how do I enter into the temple? And there's the response, there's here's what you got to do. And then there's the promise. If you do these things, you'll be good, right? So question, response, and promise. So we'll go through all 3 of these. First part is verse 1, and it is the question, "Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain?" This is obviously the question. In fact, it's 2 questions, but it's asking the same question. Just to get some background about what's happening here. The sacred tent is a reference to the tabernacle. The tabernacle being kind of basically the mobile temple. After God had freed the Jews from slavery in Egypt, we know they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and while that was happening, they had a tabernacle set up, which is just a big tent, right? Which was their mobile temple. So the sacred tent is a reference to this tabernacle, but it's also a reference to the now being then, when the psalm was written, more permanent temple, a building. And Holy Mountain is a reference to Mount Zion and to Jerusalem itself. So the city of David was on what was at one point known as Mount Zion. Has been 3 different hills in Jerusalem, basically. So there was the original one, and then there's the one this is referring to, which is the city of David, which is what David conquered when he invaded Jerusalem, and where he had his palace and everything. So that's what this psalm is referring to. And then there's a hill now, I believe, to the west of Jerusalem called Mount Zion, which is referred to as Mount Zion. It's kind of neither here nor there. The point is, God, who can enter into your presence? Because in the Old Testament, before Jesus came, before Jesus died and the veil was torn in 2, but before the Holy Spirit was given to the disciples on Pentecost, the Spirit of God dwelled in the temple. And the closer you got to the center of the temple, the closer you got to the presence of God. But when you got close to that presence of God, you had to be careful, right? Because if you weren't completely holy, and completely pure and completely righteous, you couldn't face the perfection of God. So that's why historically when Jews would enter into the temple, they offered sacrifices to cleanse and purify themselves. They'd offer offerings and things of that nature so they could enter closer to the presence of God. So what they want to know is, how can we enter into this presence? Well, then we get the response. And how it would kind of work theoretically. People are just theorizing here, but what most people think is probably the people trying to enter into the temple or a temple. We don't know if this is referring to the actual temple. It reads that way, but it might have been written at a later time. Once again, neither here nor there. What probably happened is that the pilgrims or whoever was trying to enter into the temple would say the question, and then the priest, the temple, or someone would respond with the response. So it was a back and forth liturgy. But we're going to go through this a little more verse by verse here. But this is the response, verses 2 through 5, the first half of verse 5. What I'll really point out is the immense amount of parallelism. There's so much synonymous parallelism in this section. There's also some synthetic parallelism. But right, let's read through it. The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from the heart, whose tongue utters no slander, who does no wrong to a neighbor, who casts no slur to others, who despises a vile person, who honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps an oath even when it hurts, who does not change their mind, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. I realize not all of these actually said who, but I wanted to read it that way so you understood. It is just quick and quick and quick. It's who does this, who does this, who does this, who does this. It's parallel to each other. And that parallelism would help a Hebrew reader memorize this so that they would be ready to speak it when they wanted to enter into the temple. They wanted to know what the requirements were. So let's dive in a little deeper. Verse 2, the one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart. It's about being perfect, whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from its heart. And it's based on action. It's based on truth. It's based on what you say. That's going to be a big theme of the psalm, is what you say. Not just what you do, but what you say is really important. But it's such a high bar. It's simple. The one whose walk is blameless, but it's such a high bar. Let's go on. Whose tongue utters no slander, who does no wrong to a neighbor, and casts no slur on others. There's a huge theme here of what you say matters. There's also this theme of treating others well matters. Later on, it's going to dive into how you're supposed to treat the innocent and the poor. But what you say and how you treat others matters. Who despises a vile person but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps an oath even when it hurts and does not change their mind. We're going to start with the bottom part first. Who keeps an oath even when it hurts and does not change their mind. It's about being steadfast. It's about being faithful. It's about doing what you say you're going to do. No, who despises a vile person is a bit idiomatic. We're often told as Christians that we're not really supposed to hate other people, which is true. But here it's saying hate vile people, right? It's a bit idiomatic. So in English language, we understand when we say something like break a leg to a performer, we don't actually want them to break their leg. They get that. It's an idiom meaning good luck. Here, despise a vile person probably doesn't mean actually hate the person and despise them. But what it does mean is show preference to honoring those who fear the Lord or honoring vile people. Verse 5, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Now, something to point out, lending money itself is not bad. Culturally, you have to understand that They weren't loaning at 5-10% like we would loan. No, they were loaning at 30-50% interest, trying to make back all the money so that they could, all the money very quickly and more, so that they could take advantage of people. And instead, they're saying, lend money to the poor without interest. It does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Treating others, especially those who have no power, with respect still matters. There's something I want to point out about this whole section is what it did not include. It did not say who may enter the temple. Those who offer sacrifices, those who complete the guilt offering, those who follow through on the sin offering, those who follow through on the entire Levitical law. No, it didn't say that. But culture never knew that's what you had to do. That's why you came to the temple, was to offer the sacrifices and make yourself right with God. Now, we as Christians don't have to worry about that as much because we have Jesus who sacrificed himself on our behalf. So we don't owe sacrifices to God. Through our faith alone, and by Christ's grace alone, we have been saved already. So we don't have to offer sacrifices to get right with God, to enter into his presence. But the Jews did. But that's not what they were supposed to remember when they entered into the temple. No, what they were supposed to remember when they entered into the temple was treating others well, treating others with respect, not taking advantage of people, and speaking truth from the heart. It's not about following the law word for word. It's about just doing the right thing. It's much simpler than they probably wanted it to be, which also meant it was probably a lot more available to the poor people than they originally thought it would be, right? Because the bigger your sins, the more you would need for a sacrifice. So if you committed a small sin, maybe you sacrificed a bird. If you committed a big sin, you might need to sacrifice a lamb. But the more you need to sacrifice, the more expensive it became. Which meant the poorer you were, the harder it would be to get away, to be able to do these things. So when it says who lends money to the poor without interest, it's probably just talking about don't take advantage of people. But it also probably means, hey, if your neighbor's here and they need to offer a sacrifice, why don't you help them out with that? All right. Final section, verse 5b. Whoever does these things will never be shaken. This is the promise, right? Because when question, response, promise, this is the promise. And obviously it does not guarantee perfection. It does not mean your life will be perfect. If you live righteously, your life is going to be perfect. No, let's look at the life of Christ, our ultimate example. He lived perfectly, and his life kind of sucked at the end. I mean, getting crucified, not the best way to go. But Christ was never shaken. You see, he rose from the grave. He conquered over death. So we too will never be shaken. Through our faith, our obedience to God. We might go through struggles, we might go through hard times, but we won't be shaken because nothing can separate us from the love of God. All right, thanks for joining me as we went through Psalm 15. I'm going to have the reflection guide for this if you want to go deeper into the psalm down in the description below. Otherwise, be sure to like and subscribe and join us next week for another psalm. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye.